John from Ripewave Audio, back again with Marantz's latest AV receiver. This is the Cinema 30 and sells for $4,500. Now, we've done multiple videos of this product already on different topics. We also covered the Denon equivalent, which is the AVRX 6800H. That sells for $1,000 less. If you go back and see those videos, there are some differences between the two, particularly when you start to look inside and with the noise that is present. So the Marantz is a little cleaner and a little more sophisticated inside. But today's video, we are focused in on the user experience, the different ways you can interact with the Marantz Cinema 30. And this is actually a lot of the same tool sets that you'll see throughout Marantz's as well as Denon's line. The user interfaces begin with the front panel. You have knobs to turn up the volume or change the input. You have a porthole design, which they call the main display. And you have a sub display, which when you pull down the front door of the Cinema 30, exposes this two-line display with a few extra other indicators that is built into it. And along with that extra display, when you open that door, you expose some buttons so you can do a lot of the same things that are exposed on the remote. That's a nice convenience thing to have, including this kind of joystick style navigation. And that's what you get on the front panel. And as we indicate for each of these types of user interfaces, that little green triangle means that you can control the playback functions, but the gear icon shows that you can also do some configuration. And some of that configuration can be done right from the front panel. But this also leads us to the remote. And the remote that comes with the Marantz has a lot of the buttons that are present on the front of the Cinema 30, but a few more on there as well. And as you could guess it, you can do playback functions as well as configuration through the remote interface. Of course, you'll be interacting what is being displayed on the screen as you push those buttons on the remote, which leads us to the on-screen display. And there's several different displays that are available. I first call your attention to the options button. So when you're in a sound mode, you can go in and change the dialogue enhancement, the channel levels, the tone, the audio delay, and speaker presets, amongst other things. The other on-screen display you get is when you push that info button on the remote. And it will also display when you change the modes and where you change the levels. We'll get different on-screen display messages superimposed on the video that you're watching, provided you have on-screen displays turned on. More about that in a bit. And then you have the setup menus, which are invoked by the setup button on the remote. And we've walked you through those setup configuration steps. Now there's an alternate way to get to configuration, and that's through web control. But that web control, that browser-based pages, doesn't let you control playback or see current status. It's mainly there for configuration. And there you can see a lot of the same setup menus that you have with the on-screen display. And you can also control the zone power. And I think that's to the extent that you can control the playback, is controlling these things, whether they're off or on. And you can also select what the main input is. So very limited on the playback control. And then there's this advanced set of functions, which we'll talk about later. Now, these Marantz and Denon receivers are very much like a lot of the products in the marketplace today that are moving towards mobile applications that can run on an iOS or an Android type device. And in this set, you do have the Marantz application, the AVR remote app, and you can see the status and go through controls and options as well as setup for the unit. But you can also access the web control that you would normally get through a browser through that mobile app. Then there's the HEOS app, and that's all about playback. Versus the AVR remote is kind of dancing between playback functions and configuration. The HEOS app is only about playback, and you can select your sources and you choose your zones and control your playback through that tool. Now, of course, there's also calibration tools, and we've covered these in other videos, and we kind of grade this out because it's really not the focus of this human user interface video here. But the calibration tools are available for Dirac and Mult-EQ-X, which are PC-based tools. Of course, the Dirac tool also has a Mac version, but Mult-EX is only a mobile application. So I just wanted to mention those because we're talking about all user interfaces, but we're going to focus on these others. So let's delve in a little deeper here. So they talk about what Marantz calls a main display is this little porthole that you can barely see unless you're up close to it. And when you're up close to it, there's not a lot that it's telling you. Here's the standard display. It's telling you the input, maybe the zones and the volume levels that are indicated, and whether it's in sleep mode. Very, very limited information. It could also show the tuner information. I have seen this also display the update status information when you're doing a firmware update. I don't really indicate that in the manual, but this is in the early sections of the manual. They do show you these basic functions. We compare what is shown in the manual here on the left versus the actual photo here of the porthole. Again, very basic information, difficult to see. So when you open up that door in the front and you expose the two-line display, you have a lot more there. There's a lot of indicators for the signal. It'll talk about the input signal, the decoder indicators, whether it's Dolby, DTS that is running. If you have Odyssey running, the Mult-EQ XT32, dynamic EQ, dynamic volume, Odyssey LFC. If they've been set up and they're in use, they will indicate here. It's interesting they don't have an indicator for Aural 3D. I think some of these displays have been around for a long time, and they didn't bother to add in all the functionality. Shows you the tuner reception mode, the HDMI output indication, the multi-zone indicators for zone 2 and zone 3. And my feeling about a lot of this is that a lot of these are very small. The area that's in the center there displays very nicely, but all these extra things in there, especially when you get into other information on the far right there, the sleep timer, the mute indicator, the volume indicator, the front speaker indicator, number 11, whether that's A or B, and your channel indicators showing which speakers are active. But area 10 that's shown here, the information display, thing that's showing you the source name, the source mode, the settings values, and other information, that actually shows up pretty good across the room. This leads us to the on-screen display. If you hit the info button on the remote or on the front panel of the Cinema 30 or anything else in this line, you get something that's a lot easier to read with that on-screen overlay. You see clearly the input signal versus the active speakers. I use this all the time to see, hey, did I really get the turned on with my speakers what I thought I was? Is the source putting out that extra information or not? So this is, to me, very useful information. And if you hit that info button multiple times, you get other information, such as the resolution of the video shows up the next time you push it. Of course, it's showing you the surround modes that is active. The other thing that can show up is you changing the volume. You can see a level indicator for your volume and a status on your power setting if you have that in use, that eco setting. And as you hit the different inputs, you'll get this popping up as well. This case, it's media player. If you have one of those select buttons in use, here's one with the Smart Select 3. It's got the media player, input set to auto. It's got a volume, initial volume set in a sound mode of stereo. Of course, those smart selects can be used for multiple things, but this is how that pop-up display was working. And you can see the same type of thing with audio content. Here is streaming from an Apple Music content. So very similar items here. Now, if you hit that options button, we mentioned this before, this is where you can go in and you can change your dialogue settings. Of course, it's more valuable on a movie that's turned off right now. Channel level adjustments. So you can go in and do the trims for each one of your speakers. You can go and adjust tones, and hitting that down arrow, you can go to bass, into treble, and adjust those up or down. Set audio delays for your lip syncing. You can go to all zone stereo, kind of that party mode if you're going to multiple zones. And then your speaker presets, preset 1 or preset 2. You've got 2 presets to work with for your speaker configuration and your calibration. Now, if you go into your setup menu by hitting that setup button on your remote, you can go into your video and adjust the on-screen display. So with that, you can position the volume either at the bottom of the screen or the top of the screen. Determine whether that info is on or off. We could turn that off if we wanted to. And the now playing, we could turn that off. Why would you want to turn this off? Now, sometimes when I have other people in the room and I want to make a change, I want to say, oh, I didn't have that decoding the way I wanted to. It's only doing stereo. It's not doing Dolby Surround or Aural 3D the way I wanted to. When I hit those buttons and that pops up in front of the users, that's very distracting. If I can go in through the mobile app and make those changes without that popping up on the screen, a lot more seamless for everybody else in the room, and they're not complaining as much. The other thing I wanted to bring up while we're here in the settings is under audio, if you go to surround parameters, and this is while you have surround turned on, you can adjust your center spread. And some people like this, where the dialogue isn't so focused on that center channel speaker. It's brought out to the front speakers left and right as well. And this is particularly good if you're doing up mixing of stereo audio content. Give you a more realistic portrayal there rather than having all those voices right in the middle. Now, to use the other interfaces, you got to know the IP address that your Denon and Marantz receiver is set to. So if we go into network, go to information, we will see here that I'm using an IP address of 10.0.0.201. And we can then put that into a browser, whether that's Chrome or Safari or Internet Explorer, Microsoft Edge, whatever you're using, and pop up this setup menu. Now, this looks very similar to what you would have with the on-screen setup menu. Of course, you have also the power settings for your main and second and third zones. But here we can go into that same on-screen display for the video and make those adjustments as well there. So it gives you an idea. I found some things that were kind of unique to the Cinema 30 and 40 in some cases. Now, we've seen a lot of models so far from the latest from Denon and Marantz. We started with the Cinema 50, which we also have in-house here, and the Denon AVR X3800. Then we moved up to the Cinema 40 and the Denon AVR X4800. And now we have the Cinema 30, and up until a few days ago, we also had the Denon AVR X6800. And what we noticed here is you do get some extra items in here when you go up to the Cinema 30 and 40. This one gives you these video settings on your input assignments, so you can also nail down your video. We also notice some differences here for separate levels for analog and digital inputs on the 30 and 40 only. And you can see here how the Cinema 50 is a little different. There is also this advanced button that you can select here. And you can enter the advanced by putting in the password. Well, what's the password? Well, this is the label that's on the top of your screen. Notice my screen says Marantz Cinema 30. Now, I find putting Marantz in there didn't help. But if you just do the Cinema space 30, I think it's all caps. So I put that in and we hit set. If you get this wrong, it's going to tell you. But if you get it right, it will take you into this advanced menu, which I think is designed for custom integrators. and you go into the settings here, and there's a custom integrator mode, which is turned off by default, and all these other things are pretty much turned on. So you can a la carte turn on and off various types of integration technologies, whether it's AirPlay, Spotify, Bluetooth. If you want to turn those off for whatever reason, you can do that. And if you want to turn off network control and auto standby, so it gives you some real granular selections here. This isn't really documented that I can find from Marantz, something that I've read up on the forums, etc., to get to. And you can always hit that CI mode reset button that takes you back to the factory defaults. And then there's HDMI diagnostics. So you can do a video test here, and you can go in and do an audio test. You can test cables. So this can be a very valuable feature. If you call up with video problems to Denon and Marantz, they're probably going to want you to test your cables first. So you could go and do this. You take a video cable, you put it in an HDMI input 7, and you put the other end into HDMI out TV 1 on your receiver, and it runs that test. And it'll tell you if you have a problem with your cable. And you keep running it until you pass. You put a good cable in there. Eventually it passes. And then you can do some limits on your modes. This gets really technical. And then you could send your diagnostic logs to Marantz. I think this is more for their in-house support group to use. Let's move on now to the mobile app. And there's a different mobile app for Marantz versus Denon. And this is for playback and configuration. So you go into it, you'll be able to choose, if you have multiple Marantz or Denon products, you'll be able to choose which Marantz receiver or processor you have or you want to connect to at the moment. And this is the initial screen it takes you to. And from this screen, you can see some status here, just like you'd have on the on-screen display. It shows you that we're using media player, shows you that in this particular content, we're using front, left, and right speakers and subwoofer only. And it's in stereo mode. Now we can adjust the volume. There's a little slider there. I didn't find this at first, but there's a little slider here you can adjust the volume with. You can mute it with the button here. You can change the sound mode. So right now it's set to music on the sound mode, but if we're watching a movie, we'd want to change that. So we hit that sound mode and we want to change it to movie mode. Now, if I click right there where it says movie, as soon as I do it, we'll change it to movie mode, but it will take you back to the status screen. But I would say I wanted a specific movie mode because it's defaulting here to Dolby Surround. What if I wanted Aural 3D? So I'll go back, hit that sound mode button again, and hit the gear icon this time instead of the word movie. Now, if I hit the gear icon from the beginning, it would have bypassed all these clicks and clicks and clicks. So we could have just gone to the gear to begin with to do the mode configure. And we can move that from Dolby Surround, which is the default, it seems, to Aural 3D or whatever you want to set it to. And then you have a choice of hitting the back arrow, or the quickest way to the home screen is hitting that X to exit, and it will take you back to the status. But you can also get to options. So here in options, we can do the same thing as we had with the options button on the remote with the on-screen display, but now it's in the palm of your hand with your mobile app, whether that's a phone or a tablet. And we can go in and hit the bass and treble, for example, do an adjustment here, let's say on the bass for a couple dBs up, and then we can always hit the back button. We can change the speaker preset amongst a few other things, but these are the two I use a lot. And we can change that from preset 1, let's say, to preset 2. Maybe hit the back button if there's more work we want to do, or just hit the exit, and it takes you again back to the status screen. But there's this little button on the upper left, which reveals even more functions for the mobile app. And in doing so, it displays a setup menu similar to what we had for the on-screen display setup menu or the web page. But I'll warn you that this is kind of a subset. Although some of the same categories are here, you're not going to find every configuration option that you have either with the web page or with the on-screen display setup. I'll show you a couple of these. And of course, we hit the video one before to kind of change, we could say the output settings here. We can see that the output is going to dual mode, or we're just going to go out to HDMI 1 or 2. Just as an example. So we'll back out of that. Let's take a look at speakers, because the video one seemed to be pretty good. Let's go with speakers there. Notice how spartan this speaker selection is. We're just seeing your front speakers and your remote control. So the remote control really doesn't have much to do with speakers. It's kind of using it as a remote control. We'll talk about that later, but front speakers, this is like your A, B speakers. So I wouldn't call this speaker configuration, but there is a web control button here. And when you hit this, you can get into that advanced config. In fact, when you do, it looks like the web page, just all containerized within the mobile app. So then you get to all the same functions as you usually do. And just out of comparison, we'll hit the speaker button here and look at all the other settings. We could go look, for example, change the crossovers. We can't do that in the other part. So they give you multiple ways depending on how deep you need to go. Then they have an app settings button. So this is how much you're going to be able to control with this app. You're going to want the app to control other zones. Do you want it to control your Blu-ray player or your CD player? This can all be determined amongst some other subtle things like, do you want the app to make sounds? Probably not. It's kind of distracting. And then you go back, and if you hit the controls button at the top, it takes you back to controls where we started. One thing that we didn't cover is this thing that looks like the navigational control on your remote. Well, that indeed, when you click that, mimics the functions on your remote. And here are the side by side, that little joystick-like control. And while the 4 buttons are in the position to just spread out a little bit more, the info, the options back in setup buttons. But when you use this, you're using the on-screen display versus looking at your mobile device. So if you can't find your physical remote, you can use your mobile device like a remote. The other thing I'll point out is you can hide the functions down below. There's a little button there to do so. And there's another one button left, which is the Launch HEOS app, which really takes you out of this app and launches the other one. So you'll have to have the HEOS app already installed. And when you do, it would pop up like this. This is just one of the default applications that were in here. So we can go in and look at source information, for example, on this tuned in radio thing. You can see it's an MP3 going at 128 kilobits per second. We can change the sound and volume and look at different modes. So we don't have to go back into that other app to change the volume and change the sound modes. That's all available. You can adjust that volume. You can adjust, but it's done differently. They must have had different developers or different design at least for this. I actually think this one's a little easier to navigate, so we can make those changes. Now, if you pull down with your finger, you can configure more to be done with the HEOS app. You can look at different rooms that you might have multiple zones. And are we going to control multiple rooms with the HEOS app and send these streaming signals out to those zones? You can also scroll through the list of items here and see the choices. For example, you could go and add a premium service. So if we do that, I know I have Amazon Music, so we can add here. And if you don't have a HEOS account, you can create one, or you could log in with your HEOS account. And once you've done that, you can log on with your Amazon account. So I went and did that log on here. And once that's done, you're able to see your playlist and the stations and all the recommended music that Amazon Music wants to show you. So you have access to those. And here's one of the default Amazon playlists. I could select that and I could hit play or add it to the end of a queue. And here's that playing. I can look at source information. This one's a FLAC 192.24. So this is Ultra HD running on my Amazon. You can also modify playlists, change the order, take something off, clear them. And then when you pull it down with your finger once again, we can do some more configuration. I could get music off the phone that I have. I can enable the phone. I can enable the permissions. There's a few things you got to click and click and click, but you eventually get there. So we're going to put permissions by saying this phone, and then we're going to say, okay, we're going to let HEOS access this. And then once I do, that's available to that. Now, the next thing I'm going to take a look at is how do we get Apple Music? Well, it's not done directly through the HEOS app. We got to go into our network, and we want to hit AirPlay and look at the AirPlay settings. Make sure this is turned on first. If you don't turn this on, you're not going to get the AirPlay to come into your receiver. So once you've done that, I can go to my mobile device, bring up the music you want to play back, and Apple puts this icon in the bottom center of the screen, and that lets you see the AirPlay devices that are out there. And if everything's done correctly and you're on the same network with your phone as with your receiver, you will see your device, in our case, the Marantz Cinema 30. And we can select that, and then it will start playing back the music through AirPlay. But you're not using that app. Now, I'm going to show you one other tip here. This is kind of a cosmetic thing. Now, if you buy a Cinema 30 or even a Cinema 40 or the AV10, you got these aluminum lights on the side. Now, those can be turned off. But did you know you can also change the color? Now, don't be alarmed if you don't know, because it's not documented in the manual. But there are a few out there that know this trick. So what you have to do is hit the Pure Direct and the MDAX buttons at the same time and hold them for 3 seconds. 1, 2, 3, and they turn blue. Well, even if you turn the lights off completely, you don't really see these, but it's a kind of a nice novelty thing. But I can see why they don't document it, because it's not terribly exciting. But if you want to play around with it, you can. Of course, you can always bring it back to the white lights by hitting the Pure Direct and the MDAX buttons again for 3 seconds, and you're back to your white lights. So what is your thoughts on all the user interface options available, not just with this Marantz model, but all these Denon Marantz receivers and AV processors out there? There's a lot of options out there. They're not perfect. You know, I wish they would add some more playback capabilities to the web app. The mobile app tends to be a little clunky, a little slow. There's delays in there. The web app is a lot snappier, but you don't have that status information about what's playing and what mode is. So it's not really a playback tool. It's a configuration tool. And the HEOS app, my thoughts are, I'm just more happy using an Apple TV plugged into one of the inputs and getting all my streaming stuff than to use HEOS. But if you have use cases that give that HEOS an advantage over, let's say, an Apple TV, I want to know about them, because I might learn something there. Please, if you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, and consider going to our Patreon. We'd love to have you part of that community as well at www.patreon.com/Ripewave. You can also provide a one-time donation by hitting that thanks button. Always appreciated. Of course, it costs nothing to hit that bell notification so you're notified when the next video is posted. Until then, keep evolving your audio experience.